Hello and welcome to the Wednesday, August 27th, 2025 edition of the SANS Internet Storm Center's Stormcast. My name is Johannes Ulrich, recording today from Baltimore, Maryland. And this episode is brought to you by the SANS.edu Graduate Certificate Program in Cloud Security. In Diaries today, I wrote a little bit about good old international domain names, IDNs, and Punycode. Punycode is used to encode non-ASCII characters in domain names, and there are sort of some interesting detections that you can perform on these domain names. Of course, one of the risks of these domain names is that they're being used in phishing. And one particular issue here is if you do have domain names that use characters from different languages. And I recently sort of was working a little bit with our new domain name system where we're looking for suspicious domains on some ways to better do this. So I'm publishing here a Python script I'm using to accomplish this. Essentially, the idea is it's not quite easy to actually identify a language a particular character belongs to. If you think, for example, about the normal ASCII character set, there is a number of different languages that can be expressed with the normal ASCII character set. However, what Unicode identifies is a so-called script. A script is essentially a group of characters being used in certain languages, like, for example, Cyrillic or Latin, which is what's usually sort of known as the ASCII character set. And just by looking at the mix of scripts, for example, you're able to identify, for example, an Asian character being used as part of a domain name that's otherwise just using Latin script, so likely English or European languages. This is easily expressed in a little Python script, and well, if you check out the diary post, you'll see a link to the GitHub repo, which contains this very brief and simple Python script. And Citrix today released a bulletin and patches for Netscaler ADC. These patches are addressing three different vulnerabilities. The most severe one, with a CVSS base score of 9.2, is a memory overflow vulnerability, and apparently is already being exploited in the wild in order to deploy web shells and other malware. So certainly must be patched. And now you're vulnerable if Netscaler is configured as a gateway or as a AAA virtual server. The second vulnerability is also a memory overflow. The third one is an improper access control vulnerability that allows access to the Netscaler management interface. The last one is the least risky one according to the CVSS score, with a base score of 8.7. So in particular, with the first one already being exploited, you certainly must patch this now. And talking about already exploited vulnerabilities, CISA also added a recently patched Git vulnerability to its already exploited vulnerability catalog. This particular vulnerability is an interesting sort of parser issue when it comes to the Git configuration file, where essentially carriage returns at end of lines can be lost, which can then lead to different lines being merged, which can be exploited if a victim checks out a submodule. And then due to this particular problem, the paths essentially where this submodule is being checked out in are being corrupted, which can then lead to writing files that later can be executed. Interesting that this vulnerability is being exploited and so far only marked now as being exploited, since a proof of concept exploit has been around for a while now. The vulnerability was patched beginning of July, and I would expect all the Linux distributions and such having updated packages available. And well, I guess since today's theme apparently is already exploited or soon to be exploited vulnerabilities, the last one I have here is recently Docker Desktop for Windows did publish a container breakout vulnerability. Well, we now have a proof of concept and a write-up about this particular vulnerability. The root cause here is really sort of a server-side request forgery issue that can be used to reach out to the internal API, which does not require authentication and can then lead to that execution of code on the host. Interesting vulnerability, actually, and I think these server-side request forgery vulnerabilities are often underestimated, and it's a nice example how a simple unauthenticated internal API can lead to additional problems here. Well, and that's it for today. So thanks for listening and talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.